Today I'm here to tell you a little story about discovering your passion and living your dream. I hope by the end you'll feel somewhat inspired, as opposed to right now when you're all staring at me blankly and probably feeling nothing. Which is fine. I'm totally comfortable with your current lack of emotion, and I hope to change that by the end. So for me, telling a story means not having any slides. For you, that means you have to stare at all this the whole time. And I'm not sure how you feel about that. Maybe you're mildly horrified at the thought. Maybe you feel cheated that there won't be any snazzy graphics or videos. Or maybe, in the rarest of rare scenarios, you're actually excited at the thought of staring at me for 15 minutes, in which case I'm the one who's mildly horrified in this moment. But it's okay. I'm going to keep going. We're just going to try to get through this and to the cupcakes, which will be soon. So this story begins in a faraway land called Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. Woo! Shout out. It was a simpler time back then. It was a time when DVDs were emerging as a crazy new form of home video entertainment. It was a time when video stores actually still existed, which I would know because I was Blockbuster Video's Employee of the Month in October 1999, and I will always remember that forever. Thank you. And it was a time when you couldn't take a picture of yourself with your phone. In other words, it was the golden age of living. And it was also the time that I was finishing up high school. This is a time when I knew two things about myself. One, I loved to write. And two, I was obsessed with documentaries on ancient Egypt for some strange reason. Now, obviously, as you can guess, there is a direct correlation between items 1 and 2 and the fact that I had 0 dates in all of high school. This is a very different story. That story involves tears, which turn into heavy sobbing, like the kind of sobbing where your whole upper body shakes, and then finally, of course, emotional eating. Lucky for you, I will not be telling that story today, or ever, so you can stop looking terrified and we'll just continue. So like I said, I love to write, and I used to daydream about excavating famous tombs, and this was right around the time that my university applications were due. So suddenly, I felt like I was being drenched with a bucket of cold water. It's that moment we all have when our childhood dreams either convert into something we can do in adult life, or, in the most likely of cases, the dreams get left behind in the childhood place that they started. So for me, I really loved to write a sarcastic teen advice column in the high school newspaper, which is what I was doing at the time, but I couldn't really picture how that would transform into adult life. I also really couldn't picture myself digging up artifacts halfway around the world when my entire life had been lived within a 100-kilometer radius. So at that point, I did what a lot of people do, and I followed logic by applying for a degree at business school. I got in, and 4 years later, I emerged with my shiny, society-approved Bachelor of Business degree, and I was ready for the corporate world. Now, I'm just going to pause here and fast forward many, many years and tell you that 3 weeks ago, I just got back from living in Paris, where I spent 6 months writing and publishing the 3rd novel in my series. What I want you to know is that this wasn't some kind of fast forward to success, point A to point F type of journey. It was more like a very complicated zigzag that ultimately brought me back to my original dream. And once I explain how I got there, I hope you'll all see that one job or one career path doesn't have to be your locked-in destiny until you retire. In reality, there's always room to grow. So for me, strangely, the journey to become an author somehow began on the 70th floor of Toronto's tallest office tower when I began my first corporate job in advertising sales. Now, I can summarize that work environment in 3 main points. Point 1, we had to wear blazers every day to work, even in the middle of July when it was like humidex 45 degrees. Point 2, we had to Windex our cubicles frantically and make sure there were no spots anytime the VPs were flying in from the New York office. And 3, it was a place that was so competitive that it resulted in daily stress eating, courtesy of Tim Hortons freshly baked cookies. This, in turn, resulted in a 15-pound weight gain, which didn't bother me on a self-esteem level. I was fine with it. But on a sizing level, I had to buy all new office pants. This turned out to be not only costly, but frustrating because, as you all know, fitting rooms are small, you start to sweat, the sales associate lies to you about how great you look in those pants, and then you inevitably have buyer's remorse when you realize that the butt pockets don't align to your actual butt, and it's just all sucks. So, in other words, life was kind of unpleasant at the time because what I was doing every day was in complete contradiction to who I was as a person and the things that made me happy. My life was basically in a paradox, but I actually needed that paradox because when there's such a gap, your soul becomes restless, and a restless soul is the #1 catalyst to change. So it took me 2 years, 15 pounds, and the realization that I didn't feel comfortable in a shoulder-padded blazer, which is why this one does not have shoulder pads. But finally, I left my first corporate job and I decided to do something a little bit more mellow. So this was pivotal moment #1. Now, I was still in the corporate world, only now instead of selling advertising, I was analyzing it. This meant that I would get through the days by chatting and laughing with my coworkers instead of stressing about a sales number. In fact, the more that I laughed, chatted, and internet surfed the day away while still getting all my work done, of course, the more I started to become inspired to write things down. And that's when I started a blog, which is pivotal moment #2. Now I know at this point you're all thinking, big deal. Anybody can start a blog. And actually, you are right, because let's have a look. Grumpy cats have blogs. Ugly Renaissance babies have blogs. At one point, Angelina Jolie's right leg had a blog. There is even a blog entitled, "Is Ryan Gosling Cuter Than a Puppy?" which obviously is a resounding yes, so I'm not even sure why we need a blog to debate that, but it exists. You can Google it after just to know that I'm not lying. So anyway, having a blog is the least biggest deal in the world. I totally agree with you. But for me, it was the thing that gave me focus when, in 2008, I themed my blog around the common struggle of being single, along with the multicultural struggle of avoiding arranged marriage. And I was very happy to find that readers really seemed to connect with the blog, so much so that it inspired the first novel that I wrote. So at this point, I guess you could say it was official, that my dream was back. But the thing about dreams is, just because you manage to bring them back from the dead, that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. In my case, dozens of rejections followed from the literary agents I tried to connect with, and even when I did successfully find a New York literary agent, then it was the publishers who followed with the rejections. They had all kinds of nice things to say about my book, but they just didn't love it enough, and it probably didn't help that at the time, books featuring sparkly vampires were ultimately all the rage. So this would have been the moment to give up on my dream, or insert vampires into my otherwise human book, which I ultimately did not do. But instead, I started looking into self-publishing, which by 2011 was not seen anymore as such a non-legit thing to do. And so my days kind of became a contrast of working a retail corporate job by day, and then by night, learning how to format an ebook by myself, or spending hours on message boards connecting with other authors, comparing notes, and eventually writing a sequel to my first book. So by late 2012, I'd written 2 books and published them and sold 5,000 copies all on my own. And I wasn't taking over the world by any means, but at that point it was apparent that my dream was taking over me. And ironically, I would like to state at this time that if I hadn't gotten a business degree, I wouldn't have known any of the things about marketing a product or building a brand or using promotional tools, or any of the things that are crucial when it comes to being self-published. So I can safely say that no matter what else you do in life, it's never a bad idea to stay in school. So for me, my life was once again in extreme imbalance because living out my passion was suddenly being restricted by the fact that I had this full-time job. And that led to pivotal moment number 3. So at this point, I have to say that nobody quits their safe corporate job and moves to Paris, right? No one actually does that. It's a huge cliche. People talk about it, oh, I'm going to go to Paris and write my next book. But no one actually does it. It's insane. And I would hear this a lot as I started to bring up the idea to people. It wasn't always in the words that they told me, but oftentimes in the looks that they'd give me. They're kind of worried about me. Basically, they thought I was having a nervous breakdown. And it's kind of funny to me how when you finally show commitment to your dream, people think you're kind of crazy, and it almost makes me wonder if being truly happy is a taboo thing in our society. Because if you think about it, if you're content and you're living within the drawn-out lines of society, no one really gives you a second glance. But if you've found your path and you know what it takes to get there and you're committed, sometimes people look at you like you're wearing a foil hat and you're fearing an alien abduction, and they want you to go into therapy, and they just have no idea what's wrong with you. And I think this is a problem in our society, and it's something that I'll continue to ponder long after this talk. Anyway, for me, I absorbed all the worried looks and the comments that were thinly veiled about being self-indulgent. I absorbed it all. And I did something that society would definitely view as crazy when I randomly booked a one-way ticket to Paris. Now keep in mind, not only had I never been to Paris before, I'd never even been to Europe before, I hadn't found an apartment, I hadn't applied for a visa, I hadn't done any of the things that you would plan out and do before uprooting your life. I just thought to myself, if I book this one-way, non-refundable ticket, then it'll be way too late to chicken out. And ultimately, that was the case. So I guess this kind of brings me to my most important piece of advice, which is, if you are scared to pursue your dream, you must book non-refundable things. Things with cancellation fees. I'm serious. Money talks. So if you're afraid to do something and not doing the thing results in some kind of financial risk, you will end up doing the thing and achieving your dream. It's amazing. It's almost like automatic courage brought to you by your savings account, and I highly, highly recommend it. So in my case, this past May, on a sunny but chilly day, I arrived in Paris, and my quest to be inspired to start the 3rd book in my series began. The funny thing is, it wasn't even just about writing anymore. It was about embracing new experiences and coming into contact with people I never would have gotten in contact with if I hadn't done this crazy thing that no one expects you to do almost a decade into your career. And that kind of brought me to the biggest realization of all, which was that there really is no age limit to having dreams. I mean, I will never again associate a dream as being only a childhood thing. And that, for me, is pivotal moment number 4. It took me years to get to this place, years. But I learned so much that I never could have learned at age 18, which proves to me, and hopefully to you, that you don't have to have all the answers by the time you finish high school, or by any other point for that matter. All that matters is listening to your inner voice. A lot of times, the voice will get overpowered by outside noise, but that's why it's all the more important to hear the wisdom when it does come, and to acknowledge that. If you're able to do that, you'll continue to grow as a person. As a final thought, I just wanted to say that I hope you all view each step like high school or university, your first job or your second job, as a journey rather than an end to curiosity or a conclusion to effort. Never stop trying new things because, I mean, who knows? You might even wind up in Paris one day, hanging out with your newfound friends by the riverbank, having fresh baguettes at 7 p.m. because yes, they have fresh baguettes at 7 p.m. on a Sunday. I'm serious, look it up, it's amazing. You just never know what's going to happen if you keep listening to your inner voice. So I hope you'll think about that and everything else I said. Thank you.